Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We are so glad you are here with us today.
Yeah, really excited to get into this one.
Because today we are going to completely dismantle something you have probably been told your entire life. I mean, think about every self-help book you have ever read.
Or every wellness retreat popping up on your feed.
Exactly. Every well-meaning piece of advice from a friend or, therapist, we are constantly, relentlessly told to seek contentment.
Right, to pursue this idea of peace of mind.
Yeah, we are sold this idea that arriving at a state of permanent, unshakable, calm satisfaction is the ultimate goal of human existence. But according to the source material we are unpacking today.
Which is a deeply profound exploration by Desmond Morris titled The Nature of Happiness.
Yes, according to that, this idea is completely fundamentally wrong. Contentment, as it turns out, is not happiness.
Not at all.
Contentment is simply the baseline mood you experience when life is good. It is the absence of immediate threat. But happiness. Happiness is the explosive, transient, electric sensation we experience when life suddenly gets better.
It is a spike.
Right, a surge. It is the acute, instantaneous moment of improvement.
And that distinction is incredibly profound. It is the absolute bedrock of everything we are going to explore today. Understanding this transient nature, the fact that happiness is biologically designed to be a fleeting, ephemeral sensation.
It actually prevents us from feeling like we are somehow failing at life.
Exactly. You are not supposed to be happy all the time. No human being is wired for permanent euphoria. If we were, we would we would lose our drive to survive and adapt.
We just sit there.
Right. There is a brilliant quote from a cynic mentioned in the evolutionary framework we are studying that perfectly encapsulates this biological reality. The cynic says, "Life is prolonged misery interrupted by brief moments of happiness."
Which sounds so dark.
It really does. If you just hear that on the surface, it sounds incredibly dark, almost nihilistic. But when you look at it through the strict, pragmatic lens of human evolution, it is actually incredibly liberating.
No.
It means those brief interludes, those spikes of joy, are working exactly as they were designed to work.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because it really does take so much pressure off. You don't have to be perfectly happy sitting in traffic on a Tuesday morning.
No, you definitely don't.
So here is the mission for our deep dive today, and what you can expect as we go on this journey together. We are going to explore the deep, ancient evolutionary origins of human happiness.
We are going to dissect its many bizarre, beautiful, and sometimes deeply uncomfortable classifications.
Yeah, everything from the surprisingly intense joy you might get from perfectly balancing a complex spreadsheet.
Oh, I love a good spreadsheet.
Me too. To the absolute primal thrill of skydiving, to profound, quiet joy of helping a total stranger on the street.
And ultimately, we are going to uncover how you can actually hack your own ancient biological programming to find more of these peak moments in the highly unnatural, modern human zoo that you and I currently live in.
It really is a human zoo, isn't it?
Totally. Our physical surroundings, our social structures, our daily routines have changed exponentially over the last few millennia. But our hardware, the biological computer processing everything inside our skulls.
It's still running on ancient code.
Precisely. Code written millions of years ago on the prehistoric savanna. And if we genuinely want to understand how to trigger that ancient code to produce happiness today, we have to look back at how and why it was written in the first place.
I want you to take a mental journey with us right now. Let's travel back roughly 1 million years. Before the megacities, before the sprawling farms, before the concept of money or written language.
Just raw survival.
Right. Imagine our remote ancestors. We started out as tree-dwelling monkeys. And the lifestyle of a tree dweller, when you really look at the behavioral ecology, is actually pretty gentle.
It is highly repetitive.
Yeah, you sit in the branches, you reach out and pick a piece of fruit, you eat some nuts, you might catch the occasional insect. It is a relatively passive, continuous grazing kind of existence.
There are not a lot of massive, adrenaline-fueled peak moments in the day-to-day life of a fruit-picking monkey.
No, the canopy provides safety, the food is largely stationary, and the challenges are minimal. But then, our ancestors did something incredibly radical.
They took a completely new, incredibly dangerous evolutionary route.
They climbed down from the absolute safety of the trees, and they stepped out onto the wide open plains. And they didn't just walk out there to forage. They became pack hunters.
And that single momentous shift changed absolutely everything about the human brain and our neurochemical reward system.
It had to.
It really did. Think about the sheer mental and physical requirements of that transition. To go from a gentle, passive fruit picker to a lethal predator on the plains required unprecedented adaptations. First and foremost, it required massive, incredibly complex cooperation.
Because a single monkey can't do much.
Right, a puny primate with no natural armor, no massive fangs, and no sharp claws cannot possibly take down a large, fast prey animal alone.
Makes sense.
Second, it required nuanced communication to plan strategies, lay traps, and organize the real-time tactics of the chase. Third, and perhaps most importantly from a psychological perspective, it required an entirely new kind of courage.
Because their instinct would be to run away.
Exactly. For a monkey, the absolute biological instinct at the first sign of a predator or danger is to panic and flee upward into the safety of the canopy. Our ancestors had to biologically repress those deeply ingrained panic responses.
They had to stand their ground.
Stand their ground on the flat earth, face terrifying hazards head-on, and take serious, life-threatening risks. And finally, it required intense, focused concentration.
Because tracking isn't easy.
Picking a piece of fruit is an instantaneous action. Tracking and hunting an animal takes hours, sometimes days of concerted, unbroken persistence, reading subtle signs in the dirt and predicting animal behavior.
This is exactly where the concept of target happiness, or what we might call the happiness of the achiever, is born. Because we had to become athletes, we had to become calculated risk takers, and we had to become fundamentally obsessed with a goal.
And that ancient hunter programming survives completely intact within you and me right now.
It really does. We no longer hunt mammoths on the savannah, obviously, but we still have an overwhelming, undeniable biological imperative to hunt. So what do we do in the modern world? We hunt symbolic equivalents.
We just rebrand it.
Yeah. Just look at the everyday vocabulary of modern life. It is entirely, almost comically, structured around this primeval hunt. What do you do when you have a great day in the stock market?
You make a killing.
Exactly. What do you do at your corporate job? You hit a target. What does a medical researcher do when looking for a vaccine?
They track down a cure.
Yes. What does a photographer or an artist do? They try to trap the perfect image on canvas. We are all still hunters. We're just wearing different clothes and chasing highly abstract prey.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. Target happiness is the direct, unadulterated descendant of the hunt, and the evolutionary framework breaks this down into 3 distinct, highly orchestrated psychological stages.
Let's hear them.
First is the anticipatory stage. Because we evolved to be intensely curious and inventive to survive, we actually love anticipating new projects. Just the mere thought of a new challenge, sketching out a new business plan, or planning a complex vacation triggers a release of positive neurochemicals.
The planning phase is sometimes the best part.
It really is. We enjoy the mental preparation. Second is the appetitive stage. This is the actual work, the tracking, the persistence, the late nights. Interestingly, if the work is varied and sufficiently challenging, we actually enjoy the sheer act of being busy and productive.
Because it feels purposeful.
Exactly. And finally, the consummatory stage. This is the climactic moment of success. If we catch the prey, if we finally launch the business, finish the marathon, or publish the book, we experience an intense, almost orgasmic explosion of happiness.
That spike we talked about.
Yes. It is that sudden, powerful, undeniable satisfaction. And then, a short pause, the neurochemicals recede, and the biological cycle must begin again. But there is a massive, often tragic danger here in how we set our targets in the modern world.
Right. Because if you set your targets too high, you are essentially hunting an uncatchable beast. You live in the state of permanent, sour disappointment.
The rock star syndrome.
Totally. This is the tragic, I could have been a massive rock star if it wasn't for X, Y, or Z syndrome. You spend your entire life in the appetitive stage, exhausting yourself tracking an animal that doesn't exist, and you never get the biological payoff.
But conversely, if you set your targets too low, you completely waste your immense evolutionary potential.
It is the, I like to sing, but I'll never perform for anyone, ever mindset. You never feel the thrill of the risk.
Just picking fruit again.
The absolute magic of target happiness is finding the symbolic hunt that perfectly matches your actual realistic capabilities while still requiring a genuine stretch. And honestly, the objective scale of the target doesn't even matter as long as the pursuit deeply matters to you.
That's the key.
But what happens when the hunt takes an entire lifetime and despite incredible effort, you never reach that consummatory stage? The research shares this profoundly heartbreaking, highly relatable story about Sir James Murray.
Yes, the story of Sir James Murray is a profound, almost devastating illustration of target happiness taken to its absolute literal extreme. He was the brilliant philologist and lexicographer who spent over 30 years serving as the primary editor, compiling the Oxford English Dictionary.
30 years.
For 3 decades, his entire waking life was a singular, monumental hunt for words, their origins, and their exact meanings. His ultimate prey, his final, life-defining target, was to reach the end of the letter Z.
He wanted the very last word.
Specifically, he wanted to reach the very last word, which at the time would have been Zimmerji. He built a massive corrugated iron outbuilding in his garden, which he called the scriptorium, and filled it with literally millions of slips of paper.
Millions of them.
He dedicated his entire existence, his health, and his family's daily rhythm to this colossal chase. But he died in 1915 while working on the letter T.
Oh, man.
Specifically, he passed away after defining the word turn down. He spent 30 years in the grueling, appetitive tracking stage, but he never got to experience that pure, unadulterated, consummatory happiness of finishing his life's great hunt.
Just stopping at turn down.
It is a brilliant, if deeply melancholic, example of how profoundly we can commit our neurological hardware to abstract, symbolic targets.
It really is staggering to think about, to dedicate literally decades of your life to the hunt, surrounded by mountains of paper slips, and never see the final prey fall.
Never getting the spike.
Right. But this brings up a crucial, counterintuitive point about the broader trajectory of human history. For roughly 1 million years, we were these perfectly adapted, dynamic tribal hunters. We had varied days, clear targets, and frequent consummatory payoffs.
We were in our element.
And then we basically ruined our own neurological landscape with our own technological success. We hit the agricultural revolution and later the industrial revolution.
The turning points.
Now, usually we are taught that those were the greatest triumphs of mankind. But from a strict biological happiness perspective, weren't they actually a tragedy?
It's a huge paradox.
Wait, let me challenge that for a second. Farming gave us stable food supplies. It gave us safety from starvation and predators. How can achieving biological security possibly be categorized as a tragedy for happiness?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the paradox makes perfect sense. Yes, the shift to farming was a triumph for the survival of the species in terms of sheer numbers, but it was biologically catastrophic for our daily psychological happiness.
Because it changed the daily routine.
Drastically. Farming created a massive food surplus. Suddenly, not everyone needed to be out hunting or gathering every day. This allowed human tribes to swell past their natural limits into massive super tribes, towns, cities, and empires.
It scaled up too fast.
It created specialized labor and complex social hierarchies. But the cost to the individual's daily experience was enormous. For a vast segment of humanity, life devolved into the endless, boring, physically destructive, repetitive toil of working in the fields.
Just hoeing dirt.
Think about the contrast. A hunter-gatherer's day is dynamic. You are reading the wind, analyzing tracks, changing tactics on the fly, collaborating, and experiencing the adrenaline of the chase. A farmer's day, conversely, might consist of hoeing a single, straight row of dirt for 14 hours under a baking sun.
No variety at all.
The work was vital for the empire, but it was deeply insulting to the great, complex, problem-solving brains of humans. We are goal-oriented, inventive risk-takers. We are fundamentally not meant for mindless, static repetition.
And it only got exponentially worse with the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, absolutely.
At least the ancient farmers had the sky above them and the changing of the seasons. The factory-wage slaves of the 19th and 20th centuries were plunged into dark, deafeningly loud rooms, doing mind-numbing, repetitive tasks.
Just tightening the same bolt?
Exactly. Tightening the same bolt on the same widget 1,000 times a day without ever seeing the final product or understanding the ultimate goal. Society systematically stripped away humanity's natural, varied hunting targets.
The prey was gone.
And what did that do to us psychologically? It meant that the vast majority of people could no longer find genuine happiness in the center of their lives and their daily labor, because the daily labor provided zero consummatory payoff.
Never caught the mammoth.
So people were forced to try and squeeze all of their evolutionary joy, all of their need for targets and play, into the tiny, marginalized corners of their existence.
The weekend.
Hobbies, on Sunday afternoons, the 2-day weekend, the occasional 1-week holiday. That is exactly what the modern human zoo is. It is an artificial, highly structured environment that actively suppresses our natural hunting instincts for 5 days a week. and expects us to cram a million years of evolutionary desire into our time off.
Exactly. And this brings us perfectly into the complex social dimensions of happiness. Because as our small, tight-knit bands grew into these massive, impersonal supertribes and industrial cities, the delicate, ancient balance between competition and cooperation was fundamentally shattered.
Let's look at the competitive side first.
What's fascinating here is what is classified as competitive happiness, or the happiness of the winner, because this is intimately related to target happiness, but with one crucial defining difference. Winning requires actively defeating a rival.
It's not just about the goal anymore.
No, target happiness is just you achieving an abstract goal, like finishing a painting or climbing a mountain. Competitive happiness explicitly means your joy comes at the direct, measurable expense of someone else.
And it is a visceral, primal, almost intoxicating thrill. The research uses this incredible vivid image to describe it. Think of a heavyweight boxer.
Such a powerful example.
He has just gone 15 grueling, agonizing rounds in the ring. He is systematically pummeled, his ribs are bruised, his face is battered, his eyes are swollen shut from taking literal sledgehammer blows from a gloved fist.
Pure physical trauma.
He is in a state of extreme physiological trauma. And yet, the moment the final bell rings and the referee raises his glove declaring him the victor, what is he doing?
He's smiling.
He is grinning.
Yeah.
He is radiating this ecstatic, inimitable, totally irrational smile. He is in pure physical agony, but the biological high, the massive neurochemical dump of dominating a physical rival, completely and totally overrides the pain signal.
It masks everything.
The renowned painter Francis Bacon even noted how notoriously difficult it is to capture that specific manic smile of the victorious athlete on canvas. It is the pure, unfiltered, ancient joy of the conqueror.
What's fascinating here is that we see milder, highly sublimated versions of this competitive high everywhere in daily life.
Like where?
Even when we laugh at a slapstick joke, where someone slips on a banana peel, or when we feel a twinge of satisfaction when a boastful colleague makes a minor error in a presentation, we are partaking in a tiny, socially acceptable slice of competitive happiness.
That little feeling of superiority.
Exactly. We are momentarily enjoying the feeling of being one up in the hierarchy. But it is vital that we look at this impartially to understand the full, sometimes disturbing spectrum of human happiness.
It gets dark.
It does. When the urge to dominate becomes unmoored from healthy, structured competition like sports or business, it mutates into cruelty. At its most extreme, unregulated end, this is the twisted happiness of the sadist or the torturer, who finds a surge of genuine pleasure in the complete, helpless subjugation of a victim.
They're manipulating the system.
They are hijacking the ancient winner neurochemistry through monstrous means.
Right. And it doesn't just happen in dark dungeons or war zones. It happens in modern, brightly lit corporate structures every single day through psychological dominance and mental torture.
The toxic workplace.
The arrogant tycoon. The callous middle manager. They arbitrarily impose their cruelty on subordinates just to feel that brief, illicit surge of dominant power. It is a cheap shortcut to competitive happiness.
And it cascades.
Yes, there is the tragic cascade effect of this behavior, which is outlined as the office boy kick the cat syndrome.
That's a very vivid name for it.
The tyrannical boss humiliates the manager in a meeting. The manager, unable to strike back upward, internalizes the defeat, goes back to his desk, and aggressively humiliates the clerk over a minor typo.
Rolling downhill.
The clerk, now bruised and seeking a target to regain his own status, goes home and screams at his family. It is noted that this exact mechanism of displaced aggression is a primary hidden driver of domestic abuse.
It's terrible.
People who are systematically stripped of power and status in the supertribe desperately seek out weaker victims, often spouses and children, to inflict pain on, solely to momentarily regain their own sixth sense of competitive superiority. It is a dark, tragic, systemic misfiring of an ancient survival instinct that was originally meant to establish pecking orders in a tribe of 50, not a corporation of 50,000.
It is deeply tragic, and it highlights exactly why unbridled, toxic competition is so dangerous to the fabric of our modern supertribes. But crucially, evolution didn't just wire us to compete and dominate.
We destroy ourselves if it did.
Exactly. If we only competed, we would have wiped ourselves out. It wired us just as strongly and just as deeply to cooperate. This brings us to cooperative happiness, or the happiness of the helper.
A much brighter topic.
Yes, because in those ancient, precarious, small tribes on the savannah, Pure, unadulterated selfishness would have been a rapid death sentence. An individual primate couldn't take down a mammoth alone, they couldn't build a fortified shelter alone or stay awake 24/7 to protect a camp from nocturnal predators.
You needed the group.
Individual survival absolutely, non-negotiably depended on the success and cohesion of the entire group. Therefore, the act of helping others simply had to feel neurologically rewarding.
I want you to think about this in your own life for a second. Have you ever been stuck in a horrific, gridlocked traffic jam? Everyone is angry, the horns are blaring, you're late for work.
The worst feeling.
And then you see someone trying to pull out of a side street looking desperate. You decide to just pause, leave a gap, and wave their car in. They give you that little wave or flash their hazards in thanks.
A courtesy wave.
Notice the tiny, instantaneous surge of warmth and joy you feel in your chest in that exact moment. That is your million-year-old tribal programming flooding your system with a chemical reward for strengthening the cohesion of the group.
It really is.
But hold on, the research makes a point of completely deconstructing the myth of the selfless do-gooder. Are we saying true, pure altruism doesn't actually exist? That feels a bit cynical, doesn't it?
It sounds cynical to our modern moral sensibilities, but the biological reality tells a very specific story. Moralists and philosophers like to claim we help people because we are rationally taught to be good, or because we are aspiring to a higher spiritual plane.
But biology disagrees.
The evolutionary framework suggests that helping is actually a deeply biologically selfish imperative. We feel good when we help because nature is actively bribing us with neurochemicals to ensure the survival of our genetic relatives and our immediate support network.
We're being bribed to be nice.
We are a fundamentally helpful species by nature, not by instruction. We help because the biological high of cooperative happiness ensures the tribe survives another day.
Exactly. But once again, our modern environment, the massive scale of the human zoo, can profoundly distort and weaponize this beautiful cooperative instinct.
Scale is the problem.
Because our brains evolved to help tribes of a very specific, manageable size. Anthropological data estimates those primeval human bands consisted of roughly 80 to 120 people.
The Dunbar number, essentially.
Right. At that scale, if you try to help everyone in your tribe, you actually can. You can share your food, you can tend to the sick, you can watch their children, you can physically see the positive impact of your actions every single day.
You can actually see the difference you made.
You can succeed at being a helper. But what happens when our massive symbolic brains try to artificially adopt the entire population of the world or an entire species of animal as our designated tribe?
It creates an absolutely devastating, inescapable psychological trap. The research highlights some incredible, deeply illustrative stories about the danger of adopting infinite tribes.
Like the cat sanctuary.
Yes, for instance, there's the case of a woman who devoted her entire life to running a massive cat sanctuary. She worked tirelessly, sacrificing her own comfort, and saved literally thousands of cats from starvation, disease, and euthanasia.
She sounds amazing.
By all logical accounts, she should have been overflowing with immense cooperative happiness. She was a monumental helper. But she wasn't happy at all. She was chronically stressed, exhausted, and deeply depressed. Because her highly evolved brain was hyper-focused not on the thousands of individual animals she successfully saved, but on the infinite theoretical number of cats globally that she was failing to save every single minute.
It's an impossible task. And there is another powerful example of a woman who was traveling in North Africa and was absolutely horrified by the treatment of the local working donkeys. The abuse triggered her deep cooperative instincts.
She wanted to fix it.
She started a small sanctuary, which rapidly grew until she ended up with over 3,000 donkeys on a massive, sprawling farm complex. She was physically surrounded by a living, breathing testament to her incredible empathy and her massive success as a helper.
3,000 donkeys is a huge success.
Yet she reported that all she could think about were the donkeys still suffering outside her gates. Because the tragic reality of the super tribe economy meant that the moment she bought an abused donkey from an owner to save it, the owner simply used her money to buy a young, fresh donkey and start the cycle of abuse all over again.
A never-ending cycle.
She had unwittingly set herself an impossible, infinite task. When we stretch our symbolic tribe to include millions of people across the globe, or an entire species of animal, the insurmountable reality of our inevitable failures completely crushes the neurological happiness of our successes. Cooperative happiness absolutely requires a realistic, human-scale boundary.
And the sheer physical size and density of our modern cities fundamentally destroys that natural scale.
They really do.
This phenomenon was vividly demonstrated in what is referred to as the human zoo film experiment. A documentary producer wanted to test exactly how the massive, overwhelming size of a city supertribe impacts our inborn cooperative urges compared to a natural small village environment.
So what did he do?
The producer went to a busy, crowded city street during the day, completely collapsed on the pavement, and lay there perfectly inert, pretending to be unconscious.
And people just walked by.
Dozens and dozens of people walked right by him. They glanced down, actively looked away, and literally stepped around his body. It took 5 full minutes of him lying motionless on the concrete before a single person finally stopped to check on him.
Which seems so heartless.
Yeah.
But then they ran the exact same experiment in a small rural village. The moment the producer collapsed on the village street, there was immediate, unhesitating panic and help from the nearest person.
Complete opposite reaction.
And the producer repeated this stunt all over the village throughout the day. It culminated in this wonderfully telling, hilarious moment where he collapsed outside a cottage and an old lady came out, beamed down at him lying on the ground, and said, "Oh, you are the man who keeps collapsing. Do come in and have a cup of tea."
It's a brilliant contrast. You're the man who keeps collapsing. It proves such a vital underlying point about human nature. In the village, word had instantly spread.
Because it's a real tribe.
The community was actively operating like a true ancient tribe. They communicated, they assessed the threat, and they offered hospitality. The cooperative impulse is completely intact in modern humanity. It isn't broken. It just gets suffocated and intentionally suppressed by the crushing anonymity and sensory overload of the super tribe.
Because in the city, if you emotionally engaged with every single person you saw suffering, your nervous system would collapse.
You'd burn out in a day.
So we've explored the body in motion and the tribe in action. But within this realm of tribal cooperation, there is an even deeper, far more intense, highly localized biological imperative. Let's shift our focus to genetic happiness, or the happiness of the relative.
Family ties.
Because this is where we look at the pure evolutionary mechanics of family, reproduction, and why we feel such profound attachments to our kin.
This is where the evolutionary framework gets highly specific to our species, because it argues that the concept of falling in love is not just a cultural construct, a poetic ideal invented by medieval troubadours or a Hollywood troupe.
It's biological.
It is a hardwired, absolutely essential survival mechanism, completely unique to our specific evolutionary path. We are fundamentally different from other monkeys and apes in how we rear our young, and it all comes back to the demands of that giant computer processing everything inside our skulls.
Right. Because that giant brain requires a massive amount of programming. If you look at a typical monkey or ape in the wild, a baby is born, it grows up relatively quickly, and it is reared almost solely by its mother.
The childhood phase is short.
They are swinging from branches and foraging for themselves in no time. But a human baby is practically an embryo when it is born.
Totally helpless.
It requires an entire decade of intense, resource-heavy childhood just to program that massive brain with language, social cues, and survival skills before it reaches anything resembling independence.
It's a huge investment.
This created a profound existential evolutionary crisis for our early ancestors. If human mothers waited for one single child to become fully independent before getting pregnant and having another, our reproductive rate would be so abysmally slow that the species would have gone extinct. We couldn't replace our numbers fast enough to survive predators and disease.
Exactly. So evolution solved this mathematical crisis with what is termed the serial litter. Human mothers evolved to overlap their dependent offspring.
Having multiple young kids at once.
It is entirely common to have a newborn infant, a clumsy toddler, and a highly active 7-year-old, all needing intense, constant care at the exact same time. Now, that is a crushing, physically impossible, caloric, and emotional burden for one single female to bear alone, especially while the strongest males are off on long, multi-day hunting expeditions.
So how do you get them to come back?
How does biology ensure that the male actually returns to the camp with the meat, instead of just mating and wandering off like most other male primates? Biology invents pair bonding. It invents the intense neurochemical rush of falling in love.
Love is a survival tool.
Love is the evolutionary glue designed specifically to keep the male tethered to the female, to ensure he deeply desires to return from the hunt, share his resources, and help double the parental care for that highly vulnerable serial litter.
And this requirement for a permanent pair bond forced a massive physiological and anatomical shift in human females compared to all other primates. In almost all other monkey and ape species, the female only becomes sexually attractive and receptive during her brief window of ovulation, which is heavily broadcast by a highly visible, brightly colored physical swell.
Very obvious signals.
They mate during that brief window. The male leaves, the swelling goes down, and they completely lose all sexual interest in each other. It is strictly mechanical reproduction, but human females evolved hidden ovulation.
There's no clear sign.
There is no glaring visual sign of when a human female is fertile. Furthermore, and crucially, they developed extended sexuality, meaning they remain sexually receptive and capable of intense physical arousal, even when they are completely incapable of conceiving, such as during pregnancy or after menopause.
And that profound shift, that extended sexuality, deliberately separated from the strict, narrow mechanics of reproduction, became the emotional and physical cement of the long-term pair bond.
It became lovemaking.
It literally became lovemaking. It is the continuous biological reward system keeping the parental unit bonded together, cooperating and protecting that serial litter of slow-growing, big-brained babies.
And it doesn't stop with the parents.
And the genetic safety net didn't stop with just the parents. Because human lives are uniquely long, living well past reproductive age, we evolved the extended family.
Grandparents.
The intense, surging, protective joys of romantic love, parental love, and the uniquely human phenomenon of grandparental love are not cultural accidents. They are essential, deeply encoded survival tools designed to protect the most vulnerable, high-maintenance infants on the planet.
It is a beautiful, elegant synthesis of biology and deep emotion. And speaking of biological rewards, this naturally leads us to a broader, often misunderstood category. Sensual happiness, or the happiness of the hedonist.
The pursuit of pleasure.
Because evolution didn't just wire us for complex social bonds and pair bonding. It rigorously maintained the ancient fundamental rewards for keeping our individual bodies alive and functioning. I'm talking about the pure, unadulterated joy of eating rich food, drinking, sexual intimacy, and physical bodily comfort.
And it is crucial that we celebrate the hedonist here.
Yeah.
Because the historical and anthropological record makes it very clear that enjoying the refined pleasures of the flesh is not some modern, decadent corruption of a supposedly pure humanity.
We've always loved it.
We have been actively, aggressively chasing sensual happiness with incredible sophistication for thousands of years. It is a defining human characteristic to embellish and elevate our basic survival needs into art forms.
Give us some examples.
Take drinking, for instance. We didn't just drink plain water to survive. The records show that the ancient Sumerians, all the way back in 4000 BC, were actively brewing 19 different, highly specific kinds of beer.
19 kinds.
The ancient Egyptians, over 3,000 years ago, were baking over 30 different varieties of bread and sweetened cakes. They were chasing complex flavor profiles, not just calories.
And it extends far beyond just food and drink to sheer bodily comfort. Archaeology has uncovered an absolutely stunning ensuite bathtub in the ruins of the Minoan Palace at Knossos on the islet of Crete that is roughly 3,600 years old.
A luxury tub.
It wasn't just a functional basin to wash off mud. It was beautifully decorated, ergonomically designed purely for the luxurious, sensual pampering of the queen. The Romans famously built massive, architecturally stunning communal baths with heated floors and varying water temperatures purely for physical relaxation.
They understood comfort.
The pursuit of refined bodily pleasure is ancient, deeply ingrained, and fundamentally human. And yet, if you look at modern society, there is often a pervasive, heavy cultural guilt associated with hedonism. There's this puritanical shadow hovering over us that suggests rigorous self-denial is somehow spiritually superior or medically necessary.
Which is exactly why the research highlights the absolutely incredible defiant story of Madame Jeanne Calment.
This is such a great story.
She was a French woman who achieved the remarkable status of becoming the oldest fully documented living person in recorded history. She lived to be an astonishing 122 years old.
122.
And here's the kicker. She did not achieve that extreme longevity by living a life of austere, miserable self-denial. Quite the opposite. She drank cheap booze, she enthusiastically smoked cigarettes every single day, and she regularly dined on rich, fatty foods like foie gras and heavy stews her entire life.
The ultimate hedonist.
There is this wonderful detail where, when she hit 117 years old, Her doctors aggressively tried to make her finally stop drinking port and smoking her daily cigarettes. She basically ignored their advice, kept up her hedonistic habits, and ended up outleading the very doctors who told her to stop.
That is amazing. But wait, we shouldn't take that to mean that chain smoking and drinking port is the secret to a long life, right? What is the actual underlying physiological truth there?
No, obviously the research is crystal clear that massive excess and hard chemical addiction are physically destructive. But Madame Calment's story illustrates a deeper, far more nuanced physiological point.
Which is?
While addiction destroys the body, obsessive, puritanical self-denial actually causes a tremendous amount of internal chronic stress. The constant mental anguish of restriction, the guilt associated with every calorie, the rigid policing of natural desires, all of that generates a constant drip of stress hormones like cortisol.
Stress kills.
That chronic stress can often take a heavier, more insidious toll on the cardiovascular and immune systems than moderate, joyful indulgence. Human beings evolved as opportunistic omnivores who celebrate food, warmth, and community. Constantly denying our basic biological drives rarely leads to long-term happiness and often sabotages our health through stress.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've covered the body, we've covered the tribe, and we've covered the family. But there's a third massive component here, and it's the very thing that got us out of the trees in the first place. Our giant, oversized brains.
The intellect.
Because our brains didn't just evolve to solve immediate survival problems. They evolved to a point of such complexity that they actually require continuous entertainment to function properly. This brings us to cerebral happiness, or the happiness of the intellectual. Let me pose this to you. Why do you do the Sunday crossword puzzle?
Or play Sudoku.
Why do millions of people eagerly open their phones to play Wordle every single morning? There is no prize money. It doesn't help you gather food. It doesn't protect your family from predators. By strict evolutionary standards, it is a complete waste of time. So why do we do it?
We do it because the giant human brain literally rewards itself with neurochemicals for playing complex, abstract games. It is a direct evolutionary byproduct of our intense, survival-based curiosity.
It wants to solve things.
When we are not actively using our brains to track a mammoth or outsmart a rival tribe, the brain still aggressively demands to be exercised. It hates being idle. This drive for pure cerebral activity is the fundamental foundation of both pure scientific research and high fine art.
Not just survival.
There is a brilliant observation made about the nature of scientific inquiry. The official public justification for research is almost always to benefit mankind or to cure disease, because that is the socially acceptable way to secure grant money and prestige.
The noble excuse.
But if you press a theoretical physicist or a mathematician in private, the true, exhilarating thrill that keeps them at the chalkboard until 3 a.m. is simply the joy of playing with incredibly complicated mental puzzles and the sudden rush of discovering a hidden pattern.
And it is the exact same internal drive for the great artists. Look at the tragic but illustrative life of Vincent van Gogh. He sold exactly one painting in his entire grueling life. He lived in absolute poverty, relying on his brother for paint and bread.
Very hard life.
If his primary motivation was money, social status, or competitive dominance, he would have quit painting immediately and found a different profession. But he didn't. He painted relentlessly because the sheer act of playing those passionate, complex mind games with color, light, and form on a canvas provided his brain with intense, necessary bursts of cerebral happiness.
He was feeding his brain's demand for complex play.
And humanity has been inventing structured ways to play these mind games for millennia.
Yes, the archaeological record is absolutely overflowing with evidence of complex cerebral play, proving this is an ancient biological need. In ancient hunter-gatherer societies in Africa, long after the physical hunt was over and the meat was secured, they would sit around the fire and play Mancala.
Such a great game.
A highly complex mathematical strategy game using pebbles and scooped holes in the earth. It requires intense calculation and foresight. Archaeologists have found the game of 20 squares beautifully carved in the royal tombs of Ur, dating all the way back to 2500 BC.
We've always loved board games.
The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with playing Senet in 2400 BC, and the incredibly deep, infinitely complex game of Go was supposedly invented by a Chinese emperor over 4,000 years ago, specifically to increase the strategic intelligence of his son. Our brains have always demanded the sheer joy of the puzzle.
But the human brain also has a completely different, almost contradictory mechanism for finding joy. It knows how to completely shut its intellectual centers off.
The full override.
Think about the absolute euphoric frenzy of being deep in the crowd at a pulsing, deafening pop concert, or the synchronized, roaring chanting of 80,000 fans at a football match, or that elusive, almost mythical runner's high when you are 15 miles into a marathon and the pain suddenly vanishes.
The rhythmic trance.
What is actually happening to our neurological hardware in those intense moments? This is what we call rhythmic happiness, or the happiness of the dancer.
It is a profound, highly orchestrated physiological shift. When we willingly surrender our bodies to a heavy, repetitive, inescapable beat, whether it's drums, a bass line, or the rhythmic pounding of our own feet on the pavement, we are essentially forcing the higher intellectual worrying centers of the neocortex to shut down.
Turning off the overthinking.
We are returning to the absolute earliest, most primal rhythms of life. The sound of the mother's heartbeat in the womb, the gentle rhythmic rocking of a cradle. And when we engage in this rhythmic surrender energetically, the body responds by releasing a massive flood of powerful chemicals.
Endorphins, right?
That releases endorphins, which, as we know, are endogenous opioids that block pain signals. But more recent neurological research highlights something even more fascinating at play: the release of a chemical called anandamide.
This is one of my absolute favorite details in the entire deep dive. Tell them about the root of the word anandamide.
The word anandamide is derived directly from the ancient Sanskrit word ananda, which literally translates to internal bliss.
Internal bliss.
And what is absolutely incredible from a biochemical standpoint is that anandamide is an endocannabinoid. It is chemically very closely related to the active psychoactive ingredient in cannabis.
So it's a natural high.
So when the strict, clean-living health fanatic is pushing through mile 20 of a marathon and suddenly experiences that transcendent runner's high, they are not just overcoming mental fatigue. They are literally getting intoxicated on a naturally produced, internally synthesized narcotic released by rhythmic physical stress.
It's a biological bribe.
It is a profound biological reward system designed to encourage prolonged physical exertion.
Which is just wild to think about.
Yeah.
Your body is essentially a built-in pharmacy rewarding you for moving to a beat and pushing your physical limits. And speaking of physical reactions, that leads us directly to comic happiness, or the laugher.
The joy of humor.
Now, I want you to really think about this. Why do we actually laugh? We all know it feels good, but what is the evolutionary point of this weird barking sound we make? The research outlines some hard, measurable physical benefits to laughing.
It's physically good for you.
It references a fascinating experiment conducted at Indiana State University where they sat people down and showed them comedy films. Afterward, they drew their blood, and their immune system activity, specifically their natural killer cells, was boosted by a staggering 40%.
40% is massive.
40% just from watching a funny movie. Their baseline stress hormones plummeted. This physiological reality is exactly why you see programs sending fully costumed, slightly absurd clowns into pediatric cancer wards.
It seems silly, but it works.
It might sound silly on the surface, but biochemically, laughter provides a massive, measurable surge of genuine pain relief and immune support.
But the evolutionary origin of why we develop this specific vocalization is where it gets truly fascinating. The anthropological framework traces laughter all the way back to early human infancy.
Babies.
When a human baby is born, it only has one single vocalization available to it: crying. Crying is a blunt, effective alarm system. It simply means, I am in distress, I am in danger, pay attention to me immediately.
A pure survival sound.
But around 3 to 4 months of age, a completely new, distinct sound emerges. A baby starts to laugh, usually for the first time during a simple game of peekaboo or being gently tossed up into the air by a parent.
Why then?
Why does it happen exactly at that developmental milestone? Because at 3 to 4 months, the infant's brain has finally fully imprinted on its mother. It recognizes her specific face and scent as its ultimate protector and source of absolute safety.
Right. So if we think about the mechanics of peekaboo, the mother covers her face or suddenly swoops down at the baby. The baby's primitive brain receives a sudden, jarring signal.
A danger signal.
The sudden movement or the disappearance of the protector screams danger, which instantly triggers the biological urge to cry. But a split second later, the visual recognition of the mother's smiling face says safe.
The clash of signals.
The rapid collision of these two conflicting signals, danger, immediately followed by safety, results in a neurological short circuit. The urge to cry is aborted halfway through, resulting in what researchers describe as a segmented gurgling cry.
That sound is laughter.
That sound is laughter. Laughter is the biological realization of safe fear. The baby gets a genuine danger signal, the adrenaline spikes, but it instantly realizes it is actually secure and the tension is released as a laugh.
And we carry that exact same neurological mechanism, that craving for safe fear, straight into adulthood. It is the core engine of all comic happiness.
Like stand-up comedy.
When a stand-up comedian stands on stage and ruthlessly breaks a social taboo or says something deeply shocking or inappropriate, they are deliberately triggering our societal danger alarms. We feel the tension of the broken rule.
But we know it's a joke.
Because they are standing on a brightly lit stage holding a microphone and we know we are sitting safely in a comedy club, our brains register that we are safe. The danger is artificial. That realization of safe fear triggers the tension release of laughter.
It's just like a roller coaster.
It is the exact same psychological architecture behind why we eagerly pay money to scream our lungs out on a terrifying roller coaster and then hysterically laugh the moment the ride ends. We subjected ourselves to a perceived lethal threat, survived it without a scratch, and the massive biological relief manifests as ecstatic laughter.
Safe fear. It makes so much sense when you frame it like that. We are just tricking our ancient predator alarms to get a chemical high. But what happens when people start actively seeking out fear that isn't so safe? Or what happens when people reject the normal biological avenues for joy entirely?
This is where it gets darker.
This is where the human animal gets incredibly weird. Let's pivot and explore the darker, edgier, and sometimes deeply escapist sides of happiness. Because human beings are complex, and we can find intense joy in some incredibly counterintuitive, sometimes destructive places. Let's start by looking at baneful happiness, the psychology of the masochist, and dangerous happiness, the thrill of the risk-taker.
This requires us to look at human behavior completely impartially, stripping away our moral judgments to understand the underlying mechanics.
Just looking at the biology.
The research deeply examines the mental masochism of the anti-hedonist. These are the individuals at the extreme ends of the spectrum. The radical Puritans, the extreme punishing dieters, the absolute teetotalers.
People who deny themselves everything.
In a broader social context, these manifest as fundamentalist groups. The framework uses the historical example of the Taliban in Afghanistan as an extreme societal model. These are groups who find a perverse, intense sense of joy and profound spiritual superiority in absolute rigorous self-denial.
They ban everything.
They actively ban music, they ban dancing, they ban television, they enforce strict dress codes. The psychological mechanism operating here is fascinating. If they cannot or will not partake in the natural, evolved biological joys of life, they subconsciously convert the very act of denial itself into a massive surge of smug, superior happiness.
And the tragedy of this mindset is that it rarely, if ever, stops with just denying themselves. They almost always try to forcefully impose their self-inflicted misery on everyone else around them.
It becomes a crusade.
The research highlights a brilliant quote from the American journalist H.L. Mencken, who nailed the psychology of this perfectly. He famously defined Puritanism as the haunting fear that someone, somewhere, may be happy.
That's a perfect description.
Is the impulse to punish anyone with a superior capacity for natural joy. It is a dark, restrictive, highly controlling form of happiness. And then the framework impartially notes the most extreme, terrifying end of this ideological spectrum, the genuinely suicidal happiness of the extremist.
The ultimate override.
A deeply brainwashed individual pressing a detonator experiences a massive surge of euphoric, consummatory happiness in their final moment, because they have been indoctrinated to believe with absolute certainty that this ultimate act of self-destruction will instantly transport them to an eternal, perfect, heavenly afterlife.
They think they've won the ultimate prize.
It is the ultimate tragic hijacking of the human neurochemical reward system by an abstract ideology.
It is a stark, chilling reminder of just how incredibly malleable our symbolic brains really are. We can be programmed to find joy in our own destruction. Now, if we contrast that dark ideological self-destruction with the pure adrenaline-fueled drive of the risk-taker, we see a different kind of rebellion.
Adrenaline junkies?
The research points to the massive modern rise in extreme, unregulated sports, things like subway surfing in New York, where young men risk decapitation to ride on the outside of speeding train cars, or base jumpers leaping off skyscrapers with minimal gear.
Why would anyone do that?
Why on earth do they do it? The evolutionary argument is that as our modern society becomes increasingly cotton wool, meaning we are obsessed with safety, seatbelts, warning labels, and minimizing all physical risk, the ancient adrenaline-fueled hunter inside us actively rebels against the boredom.
They need the danger.
The true risk-taker doesn't actually find happiness in the danger itself, but in the massive euphoric exhilaration of surviving a self-imposed brush with death. It is the restless ghost of the primeval hunter, demanding to feel brave, demanding to test its reflexes, in a sanitized world that no longer requires actual bravery to survive.
So on one hand, we have people desperately seeking extreme lethal danger just to feel alive. And on the flip side, we have people trying to completely artificially numb themselves to reality. This brings us to chemical happiness and fantasy happiness, the deliberate shortcuts to joy.
Yes, the historical record briefly but significantly outlines the roughly 5,000-year history of chemical happiness to demonstrate that seeking a shortcut to euphoria is absolutely not a modern failing of character.
It's an old habit.
Humans have always relentlessly sought chemical hacks to bypass the effort of the hunt. Ancient Mexican Indians utilized highly hallucinogenic Aztec mushrooms to commune with spirits.
Yeah.
High-altitude Andean tribes have chewed coca leaves for centuries to achieve a mild cocaine high and combat fatigue.
And more modern examples, too.
And then there's the famous accidental discovery of LSD in a pristine Swiss laboratory in 1943, which opened up entirely new chemical pathways. These substances aggressively hijack the brain's natural reward centers, forcing them to produce massive, completely unearned surges of euphoria.
But there's a heavy cost.
However, the biological reality is clear on the tragic, inevitable cost. With hard, sustained chemical addiction, the neurochemical receptors burn out. The subsequent lows become unbearable, and the sheer physiological destruction of the body completely obliterates those brief moments of artificial happiness. It is ultimately a biologically bankrupt transaction.
But thankfully, our giant brains offer us a much safer, non-toxic shortcut, which is fantasy happiness, or the profound joy of the daydreamer. And this circles all the way back to our unique evolutionary ability to use complex language and abstract symbols.
The power of imagination.
Because we have the cognitive ability to perfectly substitute a word or moving image for a real object, our brains can be effortlessly tricked into feeling genuine, intense emotion from completely fictional manufactured scenarios.
Think about movies.
Think about it. When you read a deeply gripping novel, or when you sit in a dark theater and watch a tragic movie, or when you binge an intensely dramatic soap opera, you are experiencing a genuine surge of happiness. You are crying real tears. You are cheering out loud. Your heart rate is genuinely elevated.
Your brain thinks it's real.
Your brain is physiologically processing the fiction as if it were reality.
And if we extrapolate this trend into the near future, the possibilities are staggering. The research suggests that as immersive technology advances, imagining a world where we have fully interactive 3D plasma walls in our living rooms, or seamless virtual reality, we will be able to completely immerse ourselves in perfectly realized, customized fantasies.
Total immersion.
It allows the modern ape to safely, completely escape the humdrum, restrictive reality of the human zoo and experience massive peak emotional highs, the thrill of the hunt, the danger of the cliff edge, without any of the physiological destruction of chemical narcotics or the lethal risk of base jumping. It is the ultimate, flawlessly safe escapism.
And it's fascinating that some people don't even need a screen or a book to escape. They just possess the sheer willpower to ignore the bad stuff in their immediate environment. The framework categorizes this as selective happiness, or the hysteric.
Selective blindness to misery.
These are individuals who simply blissfully blot out the chaos, squalor, or stress around them. The legendary British painter Francis Bacon is used as a perfect example of this. Later in life, he was selling his paintings for millions of pounds. He was fabulously wealthy.
He could afford a palace.
But he continuously chose to live and work in a tiny, incredibly cramped, chaotic bed-sitting room in London, illuminated by harsh, naked light bulbs, surrounded by knee-deep piles of trash and paint rags.
A literal mess.
Once, when well-meaning friends brought him a beautiful bouquet of flowers for his 80th birthday, he just laughed at them and said, "I am not the sort of person who has vases." He just completely selectively ignored standard domestic reality and comfort to focus the entirety of his cognitive bandwidth purely on his art.
He was a perfectly functional hysteric in that regard. But we must contrast that chaotic, selective ignoring of reality with its polar opposite. Tranquil happiness, the profound, quiet happiness of the meditator.
seeking true peace.
This is not ignoring the chaos. This is the deliberate, highly disciplined, philosophical shutting out of all the world's cares and desires to find absolute inner peace. The text specifically examines the core of Buddhist philosophy, particularly the concept of the middle way.
Which people misunderstand.
They do. Westerners often deeply misinterpret the middle way. We tend to think it simply means moderate desire, like having 1 glass of wine instead of 10, or working a 40-hour week instead of an 80-hour week.
Just finding balance.
But the philosophical reality clarifies that Buddha meant a neutral point of absolute zero desire, a complete total detachment from the cycle of wanting, achieving, and losing in order to achieve the ultimate state of nirvana.
But the research also points out a massive, unavoidable biological friction here. While achieving that absolute zero point of desire might indeed bring a state of profound, unshakable, long-lasting peace, it runs completely, fundamentally counter to our active, exploratory, target-hunting evolutionary nature.
We're built to hunt.
A million years of brutal evolution on the savannah designed us to deeply crave the surge, the hunt, the dopamine hit of the new discovery, not the flatline of zero desire. Which perfectly brings us to the grand conclusion of our deep dive, the ultimate formula for the modern ape.
Bringing it all together.
So what does this all mean? After exploring all this history, all these bizarre classifications of joy, what does this actually mean for you, listening right now, trying to navigate your own life?
It all comes down to deeply understanding your own internal happiness set point. The psychological data explains that on a scale of 1 to 10, each of us has a hardwired baseline level of optimism and general cheerfulness.
Our starting line.
And a massive foundational part of this set point is permanently established in early childhood. The framework uses the incredibly clear concept of yes parents versus no parents.
Explain that.
Imagine a child asks, "Can we play a game?" If the parent enthusiastically says, "Yes, let's pretend the living room is a pirate ship," that child's developing brain is actively wired for positive, imaginative, expansive engagement with the world. They learn that the environment is responsive and fun.
They see possibilities.
But if the parent is constantly stressed and consistently says, "No, stop making noise, I'm too busy," the child internalizes a bleak, restrictive, inherently disappointing view of life. This early conditioning physically wires the neural pathways and creates your permanent set point.
Now, the research is realistically reassuring here. It's not a life sentence if you had no parents. A massive, deep emotional trauma can temporarily lower your set point, and intense, dedicated coaching or cognitive behavioral therapy can work to gradually raise it.
It can be adjusted.
But generally speaking, human beings tend to profoundly rubber band back to their established baseline. The naturally cheerful, optimistic person will eventually bounce back and find joy even after a terrible tragedy. The chronically miserable, pessimistic person will eventually find the fatal flaw in winning a multi-million-dollar lottery.
And speaking of winning the lottery, the empirical data ruthlessly and unequivocally debunks the great modern wealth myth. We all think that if we just had $10 million, we would be permanently happy.
That's the dream, right?
But the statistics state clearly that a man with 1,000 times more money than his neighbor is only, on average, about 10% happier.
Only 10%.
Why is that? Because the ultra-rich are usually so intensely, exhaustingly consumed by the complex act of making, managing, and aggressively protecting their massive wealth that they literally do not have the time, the peace of mind, or the mental bandwidth to actually sit down and experience the varied, momentary peak moments of joy we've discussed today.
They're trapped by the money.
Wealth provides incredible options and removes financial anxiety, but it absolutely does not magically generate neurochemical surges of happiness.
So the final assessment, the ultimate actionable takeaway from Desmond Morris's incredible work is this. Happiness is not a permanent, achievable state of Zen contentment. You cannot buy it, and you cannot permanently meditate your way into it.
It's an action.
Happiness is found by actively, consciously matching our daily modern lives to our primeval biological programming. We are curious, highly sociable, target-hunting apes. We absolutely need to find symbolic hunts that challenge our specific capabilities.
Realistic targets.
We need to cultivate small, realistic, manageable, cooperative tribes of people we can actually help. We need to intentionally experience safe fear and surrender to rhythmic joy. We have to actively, aggressively avoid the invisible cages of the modern human zoo.
Break out of the cages.
The soul-crushing repetitive tasks, the isolating anonymity of the super tribe, the infinite goals that absolutely guarantee psychological failure. You have to intentionally build a life that allows for those sudden, explosive, beautiful surges of improvement.
It is entirely about creating an environment, both physical and mental, where your ancient biology can authentically thrive in a hypermodern setting. It requires conscious, daily effort to break out of the zoo's routines, but understanding the underlying biological mechanism is the first and arguably the most important step.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We've covered a million years of evolutionary history, the neurobiology of laughter, the tragedy of infinite donkey sanctuaries, the smile of a battered boxer, and the secrets of a 122-year-old hedonist.
It's been quite a journey.
But before we go, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over on your own. The linguistic research mentions that the English word happiness actually derives from the Old Norse root hap, which simply means luck.
Accidental happiness.
Accidental happiness. The unexpected joy of finding a $20 bill in your coat pocket, or finding your bag first on the airport luggage carousel.
A happy accident.
If true, deep human happiness requires us to fulfill our ancient evolutionary programming through genuine struggle, through setting difficult targets, through the exhaustion of the hunt, and through experiencing the adrenaline of safe fear. What happens to human joy in the rapidly approaching technologically frictionless future?
A world without struggle.
We are currently aggressively building a world where artificial intelligence is explicitly designed to effortlessly solve all our problems. What happens when AI writes our novels, diagnoses our diseases, and hunts all our targets for us?
It takes away the hunt.
What happens to the human brain when algorithms perfectly eliminate chance, struggle, and friction completely from our daily lives? Will we finally achieve the ultimate utopian contentment we've always dreamed of? Or, by systematically removing the struggle of the hunt, will we accidentally engineer the total biological extinction of human happiness? Think about that. Until next time.